Hey there, I'm Becky, and welcome to Literary Escapes with me, Becky. Today's episode is an author interview that I did in my membership book club, Literary Escape Society. If you enjoy hearing the behind-the-scenes story about your favorite books, you might want to join the Literary Escape Society. There'll be a link in the show notes if you'd like to check it out. I hope you enjoy the show.
I'm so excited to have you here, Casey. Oh my gosh.
I'm happy to see you again, Becky. You look awesome.
Thank
you. Got
you.
The map in the background. That's perfect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Before I jump into everything, let me introduce you.
Yes.
I have the wonderful KC Dyer with me today on the podcast, and I am so excited to have her here because she was the very first author that I had in my book club, and I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes. But
Great.
Welcome, Casey.
Thank you. Thank you. I was delighted to be there, and I'm delighted to see you again. Can you believe we've made it through a year since we talked last?
I know, it's amazing, and I can't wait to hear what all you've been up to.
Oh, not much, really. I mean, I'm like everyone else, I'm trying to survive the pandemic and not be crazy. And yeah, so it's been a crazy year. You know, I had the book come out last year, and that was really hard. And I'm about to have a second pandemic novel come out, so I'm feeling more optimistic with this one because at least the bookstores are open this time.
Yay! Yeah, exactly. That certainly helps, doesn't it?
Yeah,
my goodness.
Absolutely.
My goodness.
So yeah, so it's all good. All good.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, we started the book club with 80 Days to Elsewhere,
which is so fantastic.
Which was a perfect way to start it. And so I read the book sometime in November last year and reached out to you and said that I love the book and that do you do book club Zooms and would you join us? And you were very enthusiastic and said that you would be happy to. And the only problem is that I didn't have a book club. and so between the time that I emailed you and you said yes and the end of January, I knew I had to come up with a book club so that I could interview you in my book club.
And you did great. You did great, Becky. It was I really enjoyed meeting all the readers that you had managed to quickly accumulate.
Exactly. and it was the perfect book to start with because for anyone who doesn't know, 80 Days to Elsewhere is kind of a takeoff on Around the World in 80 Days. And so give us your blurb on the book.
Well, the thing about 80 Days to Elsewhere was that it was the first book where I had this kind of cool idea for a fictional company called Ex Libris. And Ex Libris is a company that takes journeys from the pages of books and recreates them for their clients. And so I just thought this would be such a fun idea for a company to take adventures and to allow people who have readers who have loved a book to experience that adventure for themselves. So then from that idea of Ex Libris, then I thought, okay, well, what would be the best adventure to take? And I thought, as the author, I probably should do some research here. So, well, what do I really want to do? So when I pitched this book, this was a swing, a big swing. I was swinging for the rafters because I just thought, well, the thing I would most like to do is travel around the world and retrace Phileas Fogg's journey. And in fact, when I sold the book, that is what I did. And so 80 Days to Elsewhere is the story of a young woman, Romy Keane, who's never left New York. She feels like she's a very cosmopolitan person. Yes. She has friends from all walks of life. She lives in a very cosmopolitan city, but she's never left New York. And there are reasons for that come out later on in the story. But her family runs a bookstore, and it's called Two Old Queens. It's a bookstore, and it's in New York City. It's patterned after a number of my favorite old secondhand bookstores that I have. There's one in Vancouver called McLeod's Bookstore, where you literally, if you go downstairs in that bookstore and you don't reappear, they send a search party out because one of the book stacks may have taken you out. I love the idea. I love bookstores. I love secondhand bookstores and libraries. And so Romy, who's got quite a bit of anxiety about dealing with the real world.
Yes.
Finds out that her family is going to lose their bookstore, and so she, on a whim, she takes essentially what is a dare, and applies for a job that will help her earn enough money to save the family bookstore. But it means she'll be working for Ex Libris, and she will be retracing Phileas Fogg's route around the world,
stepping way outside her comfort zone.
Absolutely. So the story is ostensibly, like, that's the starting point for it. By the time she makes her way around the world, she's no longer in Phileas Fogg's footsteps. And the truth is, Becky, that Phileas was never in Phileas Fogg's footsteps.
Exactly.
Everyone is pretty confident that Jules Verne wrote that book from the comfort of his study in Paris.
And he didn't even have Google Earth to look at.
He did not even have Google Earth. And so it was so a lot of his story was written from the point of view of, a very comfortable Victorian era white male. And so there it is, just when when I pitched this book, I have to say that I hadn't read it since I was a child. And so I had to, of course, read it again. And I was quite horrified by what I read, because while the book was considered science fiction at the time, because no one had done that. No one had actually traveled all the way around the world. And the route that Jules Verne sends Phileas on, including, parts of India where he escapes on the back of an elephant, stretch credulity to the absolute limit. But so for me, when I was retelling the story, when Romy is racing around the world and she's racing the person who is, essentially her worst enemy, she believes for at least half the journey that this man is the nephew of the person who's trying to finish her family's bookstore. So while she is on this frantic race around the world, the fun for me was to put this more in a context of today. Now, this book came out, as we talked about, in 2020. When I did the research trip, it was 2019 that I traveled around the world. And so essentially the book is sort of set post 2019, pre-pandemic. So it was set in a time that doesn't really exist anymore.
Right.
And so it was, nevertheless, it was really fun for Romy to bump into some of the things that Phileas Fogg dealt with in his story, and to deal with it in a more contemporary way. And essentially what happens is that the entire journey is a learning experience for her. And this is what I have discovered in the depths of my, aged knowledge now, is that that's what travel is. It's a chance for us to learn. It's a chance for us to see the rest of the world, and to see that people are the same everywhere, and but when you take these journeys, it's so important for you to do it with an open mind. And so that was the fun part for me, was to take some of the tropes that Jules Verne had put in. I'm quite sure inadvertently. I do not mean to cast aspersions on him. I still love his stories.
Yeah.
But completely racist, totally misogynistic, hugely sexist, so like
that was the world he lived in. I mean,
it was.
Yeah.
But rather than making apologies for his world, instead I wanted to look through the female gaze. I wanted to look through Romy's eyes at the world, and to make some broad distinctions from the conclusions that Fogg drew. And so the thing that I had forgotten, and that I think most of the world doesn't really recognize, is that Around the World in 80 Days really is a love story, because Fogg falls for this woman that he rescues from Sati in India. And of course, it has a hugely sort of superiority complex, in terms of the religions, and in terms of how, the natural superiority of the white male. It's a little so it's a lot to take, but
Right.
but that is the way that they thought at the time. And so it was really fun for me to take this character that he had, that basically he rescues this woman and hauls her around the world, and then he slowly falls in love with her, and then he marries her in the end. And now that he's rescued her from from her heathenhood or whatever it is, it's just appalling. But instead, to have the character of Sumaya, who is the young Somali refugee who's in my book, who has way more agency. And even though she is put in absolutely the worst circumstances, that she loses her family,
right,
but to give her the intent and the focus of a contemporary kid, because the reality is that kids around the world nowadays, if they have access to the internet, if they have a phone that's hooked up online, they're going to see YouTube. They're going to see, they're going to see TikTok. And so these are the things that helped shape her and allowed me to give her as a character some agency, as
she had a lot of personality, and it was fun to read her story.
I loved her. I loved her by the end. And when I started this book, I had no idea that she was going to be there. So she just,
that's awesome.
She just emerged, right? And rightly so. She floated up on her boat, and then poof, I had to deal with her.
I love how that happens for authors, that you might have an idea of how the story is going to go, but the characters completely drive the plot.
They really do. They really do. I mean, there are lots of stories that are very plot driven. Those are the adventure stories, like, the Dan Brown stories, things like that, where certain things have to happen, and then the characters are sort of dragged along for the ride.
Right.
But I find in my stories have all so far anyway, and I think this is book 10 or 11 that's and it's certainly probably 15 or 20 that I've written, but 10 or 11 that have been traditionally published, and they've all been adventure stories, because that's what I like to read. And every single one of them, even these ones that have more form to them than any books that I have ever written before, have more because they are subject to an external factor, in this case around the world in 80 days. Even though those stories are so driven by the characters, by what happens, by what they learn, by who they are. When I first visualized Romy, I knew that she didn't want to leave home, that she would be very frightened to leave home, but I didn't know why. And it wasn't until I was actually writing the book that I realized what had happened and why travel itself held such terror for her in her life. And
I love that she went out and did it anyway, because it was that important to her to save her uncles.
Right. Like that, to me, those are the parts in my story that the essential humanity of characters is so important, because even and I think that this is important, is that even if they're kind of a lousy human being, the fact that they believe that they are the hero of their own story and that they are doing the right thing. I mean, Frank Venal in this book is just a terrible person, but like, even Frank has some positive to him by the end of the story. And anyway, that's just I know that real life isn't always like that, but it should be. And so therefore it is in my stories.
Well, and that's why we read these stories, because they, not only takes us on a journey, but it gives us hope for humanity, I think. And, it shows growth in people. And, you were talking earlier about how travel, you learn so much when you travel. And if you don't grow when you travel, you're probably not doing it right.
Yeah, I very strongly agree. It's like, the most important part of it is to open your mind and to a lot of times it means accepting things that you don't understand, even if you don't agree or understand with the choices that people make, learning why people make the choices they do. This week, I'm particularly attuned to the stories of refugees that are lost at sea. This week there was a terrible accident on the English Channel.
Right.
And all that I have read that has come out of this apart from a few stories of the individual lives lost, which are so horrifying. But all that I've read is finger pointing between governments as, as each tries to blame the other for this escalating crisis. And, the fact is that we live in a world where our borders are used as weapons. And so a story
and our
where
freedoms are used as weapons.
Absolutely. And a story where the characters have the freedom to travel around the world and to go through those borders, and to each time a border is crossed, the mind is further opened. And even when you're in a place where, I remember when I was in Singapore, the thing that killed me about Singapore is that their entry documents, and I actually have used one of the entry documents I had for when I traveled, it threatened you with death. Like before you even step through the door, they make it very clear that if you come bearing anything that is considered an intoxicant or an illegal substance, that they will kill you. And so this is in, I was going to say black and white, but it's actually written in red print on their document. Anyway, this is not a point of view with which I agree, but nevertheless, I still wanted to be there, to see it, to see the lives that people led for myself. It was the most amazing. It's kind of a city state, and it's the most amazing place. That's awesome. It was fascinating because I have never seen a place where absolutely distinct cultures, very distinct, are living cheek by jowl with each other and are encouraged to retain their own cultural identity. And I love that. That's pretty cool.
It is cool.
So even though the choices that this government makes are maybe not the best, or not ones that I would agree with, nevertheless, it was still an experience that I would never, ever give up. Yeah. So,
well, the book is, if people have not read that book, it is well worth reading the book. It was so much fun. The characters are a lot of fun. And Jeremy, the one that you think is the enemy at the beginning, you get to know him a little bit better throughout the story. And I don't know, it's just well worth your time and effort to read that. I loved that it took me all around the world again.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. That's the joy of it, is that it's a journey that you can share together. And that's the best part about reading books with a book club, isn't it? Because
Agreed.
Then you get to hash it out, and all the things that you disagree with, you can say, well, what about this? And what about that? But this part was pretty good. And
exactly. And that's one of the things that I do love about a book club is that even if they don't like the choice of books that I've made, they'll still read it and they'll still give me their thoughts on it. And like you just said, some of them are like, well, I really didn't like the book at all.
Mm-hmm.
And, oh yeah, this person was fine. And this, I can see why they did this. And the end of the hashing it out. There's so many different opinions that you're like, okay.
Right. And it does, this is the interesting thing about being a writer, is that as soon as you put the story down on paper and it goes out to the world, it's not really yours anymore, because you've written the story from your point of view, from your, the stories come through the filter of your brain and your experiences. But when it goes into the reader's eyes, it's not going through the same filters as it came out of your eyes. And so what happens for each reader is different, and each of them brings something else to the story. So that, if someone has lost their parents, then one part of the story might have a deeper significance to them.
Completely different. Yeah.
Right. If someone had
reading it.
Exactly. If someone had a terrible experience in Japan, then, then that's the filter that they'll read it through. So
exactly.
So I'm always fascinated to read what it is about the story that has appealed to people, and what made them laugh, and what made them cry, and my favorite part is when people tell me that the story took them away, because that's really what I want to do.
That's what you want. So as an author, were you prepared to have to give up your story and let it be something potentially different for other people?
Well, you have to do that. It took me a while to learn it, though.
Okay.
It took me a while to learn it because one of the things I remember when I first started writing, I was writing young adult novels, and which you can totally tell when you read my novels, because you can tell that I have an essentially deep immaturity that shines through. It shines through. But what I remember, the thing that used to drive my kids, I have two children who are now grown up, but they were small when I was writing, when I first started writing, and I would drive them crazy, and they'd come home and they'd say, "Mom, the teacher is asking us what the author intended, and don't they know that it doesn't always matter what the author intends? It's what you bring to the story." These poor kids.
I love that.
Yeah, growing up with
only an author's kid.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So, but it took me a while because I did have, and I think, where I think it shows the most is when you have someone who's written a book where they want to teach you a lesson. And especially if you're writing for kids, that is like the worst way to write a story for kids, because they see through you in a second that, drugs are bad. Yeah, well, I know that drugs are bad. So it's better to, I find, to let the story tell itself, let the story come out. And of course, it has to be well told, and it has to have a circularity. There has to be growth from the characters. There's a lot of elements to good storytelling. But once the story has told itself, you have to set it free. And because that's the connection that you have with the rest of humanity. That is your root out there, because they can enter into the story and they can bring their own experience, their own take, their own filters to it. And that is such a point of connection. It's very cool. Like I have
it has to have been hard this past year to not get that in the same way.
Oh, it's been brutal
out there.
Yeah, it's been brutal. Like my favorite thing is talking to people in person about writing or about storytelling, or about, like, not just talking about my own books, but talking about, books and reading and writing in general.
Right.
I'm a voracious reader. And so I love talking about, and also I'm completely eclectic in my choices. And so I just read whatever passes me by. And so I don't really fit very well into the sort of traditional literary book club kind of format, because I read a lot of literary books. I'm just reading Bernardine Evaristo's book, Girl, Woman, Other. She won the Orange Prize, I think, in Great Britain for its amazing story. And it's just it's a series of short stories about women of color and their experience in the British system. And fascinating and really good and really, lovely story, very literary. But I'm also like right in the middle of reading The Man Who Died Twice by Richard Osman, which is a cozy murder mystery. So like, both ends of the spectrum.
I love that. Yeah, I love when you can do that and appreciate it all.
Yeah. I don't really have much patience for books that don't grab me anymore. I don't know how do you feel about that, Becky? Like, will you pummel your way through to the end? If
I do not.
You don't, eh? You'll put a book down.
Yeah. I tried, there was one book that was very, very popular, and I didn't care about the characters. I didn't care about what was going to happen to any of them. Yeah. And I had to not finish it because I just didn't care. But you know what? Life is too short. I agree with you. Life is too short. And also, I say that now with more impunity, because I discovered, I'm going to say 3 years ago now, I think, it was before the pandemic, but I discovered that I could borrow audiobooks from the library. And man, that has saved me a lot of money. A lot of money. It's a beautiful thing, man. Yeah. I have two big dogs and they need to be walked all the time. And so I'm constantly listening to audio, and I'm a big fan of podcasts too, but there's nothing that beats a good audiobook, I agree. Being swept away with and so I spend a lot of energy at the library. And if I can just, like, making a pitch for authors everywhere, if you have a book that you really like
then you can ask your local library to bring it
Yes.
in as a digital book or as an audio book or as a hardcover book. You can ask them, and sometimes they have more of a budget for ebooks. And so if you have an e-reader or an audio situation, then they can bring that in too. So and that
That's
helps
awesome.
us. That definitely helps writers. Like, because you can't afford to buy a copy of a book doesn't mean that you can't read our books. And,
Exactly. And that's, I mean, when I look for books for the book club, I do check the library to see if it's within the system, ebook, physical book, whatever, just because I know a lot of people look there. I look there.
Yeah.
And I typically buy them in the ebooks so that I can, mark it up on my tablet. But I don't expect everyone to want to buy a book just because we're reading it.
Right. And especially for book clubs, because then, I mean, there are some books that you have to read. I actually have, so I'm very fond of Ben Aronovich, and his series, the Rivers of London series, probably are my favorite books of all time. So they're kind of like Harry Potter for grownups. There's the story of Peter Grant, and he's a police officer with the Metropolitan Police in London, but he's also, a magician, a wizard. He's a wizard. Ooh. And so they're very fun books, and they're written by a man who really, really loves his city. And so the city of London is like a character in the story. And I love the stories. But I have his books. I have the paper books. I have the audio books. I have the digital books. I have his comic books. Like,
that's awesome. And do you read them more? Do you reread them?
Oh yes.
Okay.
Oh yes. I am an inveterate rereader.
Because that's a whole nother
that's a whole nother ballgame
within the reader world is, do you reread books or is it just one and done? And there's a definite schism, wouldn't you say? Like there's no one who feels give or take on that subject. They either feel very
are a rereader or they are not. Yeah.
Right.
Like it's one or the other.
There's no in between.
No in between. No gentle gray in there. And I am a rereader. My books are worn and dog-eared and used for furniture and
same. I'm gonna have to look up that London book because that sounds like it would be a lot of fun.
The first one is called, well, you'll blame me afterwards because they're very addictive. The first one in the US is called Midnight Riot. And the man's name is Ben Aronovich. And to give you an idea, he's also written for Doctor Who. So that gives you kind of an idea of the sensibility. It's fantasy, but it's funny and it's adventure-y. And anyway, I love those stories. But that's an example of books that I have in multiple versions.
Right.
I have the same with Diana Gabaldon's books. I have a ton of her hardcover books, and we're old friends, so like all my Diana books are signed. Well, she's got wicked writer's cramp right now, I'll bet you, because her new book just came out this week. Ooh. And it's the first book in definitely over 5 years. And
really?
And when I last talked to her, she had 23,000 copies that were waiting for her to be signed at the Poison Pen. So
oh my gosh.
Yeah, but hers are books that I have in multiple varieties too. And also her books are narrated by Davina Porter, who's a very good audiobook reader.
That makes such a difference, doesn't it?
Really does.
Audio
really does.
Reader,
I have been, this year I've been sort of mainlining Anne Perry's mystery books, some of which were written like when I was a child. And so they're set in the Victorian era. And she has 2 specific series, although apparently now she's working on something new now that she's 83, I think.
Wow.
The Thomas and Charlotte Pitt, and then Inspector Monk. And so they're 2 series, but they're set in Victoria, in and around Victorian London. And they're like, and Davina narrates them, and I've listened to the whole, both series over the pandemic because it's comfort listening, right?
Yeah.
So, and it's to hear something that's, historical fiction. The joy of historical fiction is that that it all comes out right in the end.
Exactly
how it finishes, right? So it's how they get there. The mystery of how they figure things out, sort things out is
always fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you are almost coming out with. It's due in a couple of weeks, maybe?
Yeah, 2 weeks, just about 2 weeks exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
The Accidental Odyssey, and it's another Ex Libris.
Yes, it's another Ex Libris story. That's right. So Ex Libris means of the library in Latin.
Okay.
And it's Ex Libris is often you'll find it on the very old book plates that were in the front of books, and so that's where I took the name from of the company. And this next Ex Libris tale, An Accidental Odyssey, is about Gia Costas. And Gianna Costas is a food writer, and she's about to have like the best, most romantic wedding ever in New York City. And she's heading off to taste samples of wedding cake from the best cake maker, because she's marrying this very eligible bachelor who has swept her off her feet. And she gets a phone call, and the phone call is from the hospital and telling her dad has had a stroke. Oh. So she runs over to the hospital, and it turns out it wasn't so bad. It was what's called a TIA, which is like a very tiny mini stroke. Yeah. And so anyway, she feels a little reassured. He doesn't want to talk to her because he's got a pile of work to do. He's a classics professor. He's retired, but a classics professor at the university in New York. So when she goes back to see him the next morning, he's gone. And not only is he gone, but he's left his medication on the table. Ooh. And so she goes storming off to the university. It's a Saturday morning. She goes storming off to the university to give him what for and to hand him his medication. And she finds that his assistant, who she bullies into telling her where her dad is, and he's flown off to Athens.
Oh my.
And so she's furious with him and doesn't get to taste her wedding cake. And he's left his medication, and he's so irresponsible, and she's nothing but angry. And so she's just going to show him. So she hops on a plane to chase him down and give him his medication, and what for. And this derails her plans for her wedding. It changes everything. When she gets to Athens, she realizes that her dad is determined to go on this journey to retrace the route that Odysseus took back from the Trojan War. Okay. And her dad is convinced that he can prove that Odysseus that the journey really wasn't mythological, that there really was evidence that such a journey was taken. Okay. And she is not in the least interested in this. And she has a huge fight with her fiance on the phone, and he breaks up with her. And that night, when she's drowning her sorrows, she meets this extremely hot guy, when she's dancing at a Greek disco. And one thing leads to another. And anyway, the next day, when she discovers that the extremely hot guy is actually an archaeologist who's working with her dad, that kind of changes things too. So this is a love story. This is a family story. It's a story about the rocky relationship that you have with your parents, and it's about how, even though they're your parents, they're human too, and the experience that you have, that Gia has in chasing her dad around the Mediterranean, and still trying to make a life for herself, because she's able to. She has just finished her job as an intern at a online foodie magazine, and she manages to pitch them on the idea of a Mediterranean journey. So this is a story that's filled with delicious food, and awesome. And also the fun part for me was the same as it was with Jules Verne, except that the Odyssey. Interestingly enough, the Odyssey, which is, of course, like nobody even knows who wrote the Odyssey, whether Homer actually existed or not, whether he was like the personification of the storytelling mythology that existed, or whether he really was a blind poet, or there's lots of stories about it. But a lot of the stories that come out of the Odyssey, the sirens crashing the sailors against the rocks, and the giants and the cyclops, and a lot of these stories were extremely fun flip on their heads, bring them into the 21st
I
century.
can't wait to see how you do that.
Yeah, and it was just a great deal of fun. And so I also have to say that I was really lucky because there was a brand new translation of the Odyssey that just came out a few years ago. And like, this is not the Odyssey that I read when I was in school, that I was forced to read. And it it was like pulling teeth, because it's
kind
this
of
long
slug through it. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And it was really good, at least, that when the teacher would sum up what actually happened, so you could, because you couldn't
Otherwise,
get
you have
past
no idea.
No, the rosy-fingered dawn, shows up quite a few times, and it actually shows up in my book too. You have to look for the rosy-fingered dawn.
I will look for that.
But this new translation was for the first time by a woman, and it's also available in audiobook. And Claire Danes does the audio, and she is fantastic at this. And for the first time, when this woman, whose name is now escaping me, but I think it's Emily Harris, Harris or Thomas. Anyway, when she did the actual translation from the Greek, and what she discovered was that all the earlier translations, where they minimized the women's roles, they were dismissive of Penelope, who was Odysseus's wife that he left behind, and she was very patient and hung out while he was gone for 7 years, and was getting it on with Calypso, and like a lot of stuff was going on, and she was very patient, and a lot of the way that we had been taught was the language, was mistranslation, and was in fact reflected the cultural mores of the time that the translator was living in. So not the original story, which had none of it, which was very female positive. And so anyway, it was really a good time. It was a good time for me to be reading the Odyssey again. And but my story is I have to say, very similar with 80 Days. It is nothing like the actual Odyssey. It is, although it is filled with giants, and there is a fight with a sea monster, and there is even quite a slap fight, very reminiscent of the Bridget Jones fight between two Bridget Jones's suitors in the water fountain. That happens on the sands of Capri. So it was really fun to write, because it dances all around, trying to get a real life version of the mythical places that Odysseus visited, and including the underworld. There is a very, very fun scene involving some illicit mushrooms and the underworld in Greece that was a great delight to read. So
how, other than like reading the Odyssey, how were you able to do research for where your modern day characters went?
Luckily, because I did the trip around the world, I fully had plans at the end of 2020 to go spend 6 weeks in Greece, but I wasn't able to because the world shut down. And but luckily I had been to most of the locations on my trip around the world. It wasn't as joyful, in that I didn't get to sit and soak in the atmosphere the way that I did on the earlier trip. But I had been there, so I was able to use some what I learned, and then the rest was research.
Okay. I was curious about that, because there's so many writers that come out with books now that were written during the pandemic, and it's fascinating how, a lot of people, either like you, go off of memory, Google Earth, reading other books that are set there, that kind of thing.
I've kind of learned my lesson about that sort of thing, I have to say. Apart from the fact that I love to travel, it is my favorite thing to do, and I was quite horrified at the fact that I was not able to travel. But if I set that aside, I also find that if I don't use original sources for my material, I always make mistakes. You can't just go with what is the accepted belief that something is the way that it is,
Right.
because invariably you'll get it wrong. And so
And somebody will let you know, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely. In my first book, and I had been to Scotland before I had written my first book, but the first book is a time travel story, and parts of it are set in the West Highlands of Scotland during the Black Plague, during the first big thrust of the Black Plague. And and I got the distances between two towns. I got it wrong.
Oops.
They were really about 30 kilometers apart, and I have them about 3 kilometers apart. And that seems like a minor detail, but you know what? Somebody wrote me.
Somebody knew that.
Somebody wrote me. Yeah. So I try. There are always going to be mistakes, right?
There's always, yeah. Just because we're human.
You know what, you have to just embrace that, because you don't want to mess with the gods. Only the gods are perfect, right? So you don't want to draw that attention. That's the wrong kind of attention to draw. So if you have a mistake, my friend, so when I launched the book, which is December 14th, so we're going to have a launch event on the 14th or the 15th, and my friend Meg Tilley and I are going to have a conversation at the time.
Fun.
Yeah, it's really fun. It's sponsored by Love's Sweet Arrow, which is a romance bookstore in the US. And they are, if you order a book from them, you get a big package of fun stuff, because we've sent them book plates and we've got postcards and all kinds of fun things, bookmarks. And so Meg was reading the book and just texted me over the weekend that she found a typo. And so I sent it in. Yeah, I know, but I sent it in, and so that it'll be fixed for the digital issue and for all the subsequent, print issues. And so this is what happens, right?
That's what happens.
And it's also
be as careful as you can be, and
yeah,
we're going to have typos.
yeah, it's going to happen. So it's a whole word that was missing. So
Meg Tilley's one I'd love to have on the podcast.
Oh yeah, so she's adorable. She is so fun. You definitely have to.
She would just be lovely to talk to.
Oh yeah, I'll put you in contact with her, because she's just a doll. And you know what? She has a new book out, which is called The Runaway Heiress. And Meg's books are so much fun. They're very Meg-like, because her series, the Solace Island series, are
I've read that one, yeah.
Suspense. Yeah, so they're romantic suspense, but this one is peripherally related to that series. So it has its like it's in the same world, right? And so this is what has been the fun thing. When this book came out, I started at the beginning and read them all through again, because it's really fun to see how the stories weave into each other. You can read them in any order; it doesn't really matter. But it is fun to see how they inform each other. And The Runaway Heiress has Hollywood connotations too. And as
I saw that,
Meg has, she's got some history there. So so it's going to be very cool. So.
Oh, awesome.
I'm gonna try to sneak in as many questions about her new book as I can when we have our little chat.
That'll be fun. What was the name of the bookstore?
The bookstore is called Love's Sweet Arrow, and it's I think it's in Illinois. Hold on, I think let me just see. I'm pretty sure that if you Google it, you'll be able to find it. Yeah. And anyway, I'm gonna if you just follow me on Twitter or something, I'll be posting all the links. We just got sent the graphic today, and so it just has to get approval, and then it's going to go. But I'm pretty sure that it's going to happen it's a crazy time of year, but December 15th or 16th, something like that. So but there it is. Somebody has to have their books come out then. So
they got to come out at some point, don't they?
Yeah, that's right. So
well, awesome. I hope that this one you're able to actually travel around a little bit.
I hope so too.
Meet people, and
I hope so too. I'm going to go out and try and sign as many books as I can, because that's the hard part, to not get a chance to say hi to people and
actually see people.
See humans. It's
exactly.
I mean, I'm a hermit. I live in the woods and with my dogs, and I'm perfectly happy here. But every once in a while, it's nice to go out
to get out in the world sometimes.
Meet the real world again. Yeah. Yeah.
So
for sure.
in the Accidental Odyssey, where all does your character go to?
Well, following her dad, they hip hop all across, back and forth around the Mediterranean. If Odysseus had been better organized, he would have created, a more coherent journey. But they get to visit places like, I think I mentioned Capri, because that's where the fist fight happens on the beach. But Capri is also where there's some very buff sirens that nearly cause Gia to take meet a very bad end. And so, but it starts in Athens. It works its way around to the main coastal part of Greece, to the mainland Greece, then hops across several of the islands. So you get to Sicily, you get to see Mount Etna. We get into Italy, the coast of Italy to Naples, and all around. So it's back and forth across the Mediterranean. It's a very fun, crazy, eventful journey where lots of surprises happen, lots of twists and turns.
I can't wait to read it.
Yeah, it's I'm really excited to share it with everybody.
Well, that's awesome. Well, I cannot wait for it to come out, and I look forward to reading it and sharing it with everybody.
That's awesome.
Thank you so much for joining me today. It was so much fun to chat with you.
Thanks for joining me today on the Literary Escape podcast. If you enjoy hearing the behind the book story, then join me in the Literary Escape Society. We're a community of travelers who love books, or maybe book lovers who love to travel. Either way, if you need an escape, a literary escape, come join us as we read our way around the world together, one book at a time. Check out the show notes to learn more about the Literary Escape Society. And we'll see you next time on the next episode.